Right now, as you are watching this video, there are serial killers walking free, whose names you will never hear on the news. They are not locked away in maximum security prisons. They are not splashed across headlines or featured in Netflix documentaries. They are invisible monsters, hiding in the shadows of forgotten corners around the world. Have you ever walked past someone and felt that gut instinct that something was just off? Have you ever trusted someone completely, only to discover they were not who they seemed? Maybe it was your neighbor who always smiled a little too wide. Maybe it was that helpful stranger who offered assistance when you needed it most. We all have those moments where our instincts scream danger, but we ignore them. Today, we are diving into the shadows where the most dangerous predators hide. Not in maximum security prisons, but in plain sight. What you are about to discover will change how you see the person serving your coffee, investigating your case, or even baking your bread. Before we begin this journey into darkness, smash that like button if this already has your heart racing, and make sure you subscribe because we are just getting started. Drop a comment below if you have ever had that creepy gut feeling about someone. I want to hear your stories. Tonight, you will meet 3 monsters who have never graced your television screen. These are not the killers you know. These are not the household names that haunt your nightmares. These are worse. From the tropical islands of Indonesia to the frozen cities of Eastern Europe, then across to the vast American wilderness, 3 predators operated in complete darkness, each one more calculated, more twisted, and more successful at evading justice than the last. First, we travel to the remote Indonesian island of Kencana, where a spiritual healer named Hadi Purwanto turned sacred rituals into unholy murder. This man did not just kill, he perverted an entire community's faith, transforming their deepest beliefs into his weapon of choice. Women came to him seeking healing and hope. Instead, they found death disguised as salvation. Next, we venture into post-Soviet Eastern Europe, where former police investigator Leonid Kozlov used his badge as a hunting license. For over 2 decades, this corrupt cop exploited his position to cover his tracks while targeting the most vulnerable members of society. He did not just break the law, he was the law. Finally, we cross the Atlantic to the American frontier, where Baker Warren Breckinridge transformed the wilderness into his personal killing ground. This quiet man turned hunting from sport into systematic murder, using his private plane to transport victims to their doom. Let us start our journey in the tropical hell of Kencana Island, where ancient traditions became modern horror. Hadi Purwanto was born into poverty on the remote Indonesian island of Kencana, where ancient traditions still govern daily life. His father commanded respect throughout their village as a successful cattle breeder, but their household harbored dark secrets beneath its veneer of honor. Superstition and fear ruled their home, creating an atmosphere thick with mystical beliefs and whispered warnings. When Hadi witnessed his father's death at age 15, something fundamental broke inside him. The loss did not bring grief, it brought opportunity. Within weeks of the funeral, young Hadi began claiming supernatural visions. He told anyone who would listen that his deceased father's spirit had returned with a divine mission to identify and eliminate women believed to be cursed, ensuring only those with true mystical potential would survive. The isolated community, desperate for spiritual guidance in their harsh existence, embraced Hadi's claims. His knowledge of local folklore, combined with his inheritance of his father's revered status, provided the perfect foundation for his transformation. He established himself as a spiritual healer, offering hope to women struggling with infertility, illness, and domestic troubles. Hadi's clinic became a sanctuary decorated with ancestral relics and traditional healing tools. Women traveled from neighboring villages, drawn by stories of miraculous cures and spiritual renewal. They brought offerings of food, money, and jewelry, desperate for solutions to problems that modern medicine could not address. His reputation grew through carefully orchestrated success stories. Hadi would select certain women for minor healing rituals that actually worked, using herbal remedies his grandmother had taught him. These genuine healings served as proof of his supernatural abilities, creating a network of believers who spread his fame across the island. Trust became his most powerful weapon. Hadi's victim selection process was methodical and predatory. He targeted women who came to him alone, without family members accompanying them. These were typically widows, unmarried women over 30, or wives whose husbands worked on distant fishing boats for months at a time. Their isolation made them perfect prey. No one would immediately notice their absence. The psychological manipulation began during their first consultation. Hadi would perform elaborate diagnostic rituals, claiming to read their spiritual auras and communicate with ancestral spirits. He convinced each victim that she carried a dangerous curse that threatened not only her own life but the entire community. Only through his specialized cleansing ceremony could the curse be lifted and her true mystical potential awakened. His modus operandi was chillingly systematic. Hadi would schedule the cleansing ritual for a specific night when the moon phases aligned with ancient traditions. He insisted the ceremony must take place in complete secrecy to maintain its spiritual power. Victims were instructed to tell no one about the appointment and to come wearing white clothing as a symbol of purification. The twisted ceremonies took place in a hidden chamber beneath his clinic, accessed through a concealed entrance behind a false wall. Hadi had constructed this underground space specifically for his murders, decorating it with religious artifacts and ceremonial symbols to maintain the illusion of sacred ritual. During the ceremony, victims would drink a ceremonial tea laced with local herbs that caused drowsiness and confusion. As they became disoriented, Hadi would begin chanting traditional prayers while slowly tightening a concealed rope around their necks. The strangulation was deliberate and prolonged, allowing him to maintain the facade of spiritual possession until the very end. After each murder, Hadi performed his most twisted ritual. He would collect the victim's blood in a ceremonial cup, mixing it with wine and traditional spices before drinking the mixture. He believed this act would transfer their mystical energy to him, making him more powerful with each killing. The bodies were then wrapped in white cloth and buried in carefully chosen locations throughout the sugarcane fields that surrounded his property. To cover his tracks, Hadi would tell concerned family members that their loved one had achieved spiritual transcendence and chosen to retreat to a distant monastery for meditation. In a culture where such spiritual journeys were respected and unquestioned, his explanations were readily accepted. This deception allowed him to continue killing for nearly a decade without suspicion. The beginning of Hadi's downfall came through pure chance. A local farmer, expanding his sugarcane plantation, discovered human remains while clearing a new section of field. The bones were wrapped in decaying white cloth and buried in a shallow grave, marked with strange symbols carved into nearby trees. Local police initially dismissed the discovery as an ancient burial site, common throughout the Indonesian islands. However, the presence of modern jewelry and dental work indicated a recent death. When a second body was found just 50 meters away, authorities realized they were dealing with something far more disturbing. The investigation faced immediate challenges rooted in the community's deep cultural beliefs. Many villagers insisted the deaths were the result of supernatural forces or ancient curses awakened by modern development. They resisted police questioning, viewing the investigation as an intrusion on sacred matters that should be handled by spiritual leaders rather than law enforcement. Detective Indra Sari, one of the few officers trained in modern forensic techniques, took charge of the case. Her analysis of the burial sites revealed a pattern. Each grave was positioned according to traditional spiritual geometry, suggesting someone with extensive knowledge of local mystical practices. The symbolic markings carved into trees matched ancient purification rituals described in regional folklore. As more bodies were discovered throughout the sugarcane fields, Detective Sari began interviewing family members of missing women. A disturbing pattern emerged. Nearly every victim had last been seen visiting Hadi Purwanto for spiritual healing. However, convincing the community to consider their beloved healer as a suspect proved nearly impossible. The breakthrough came when Detective Sari found ceremonial items buried with the bodies that matched artifacts from Hadi's clinic. Forensic analysis revealed traces of the same herbal mixture found in his healing teas. When confronted with this evidence, several villagers finally admitted they had seen women entering Hadi's clinic on the nights they disappeared, but never emerging. Hadi Purwanto's arrest shocked the entire island community. When police raided his clinic, they discovered the hidden underground chamber where he had committed his murders. The room contained ceremonial cups, still stained with dried blood, coils of rope used for strangulation, and a detailed journal documenting each killing with frightening precision. During interrogation, Hadi showed no remorse for his actions. He insisted he had been fulfilling a divine mission given to him by his father's spirit. He described each murder as a sacred act that had purified the island by removing cursed women and transferring their spiritual energy to him. His calm demeanor and detailed confessions horrified even experienced investigators. The trial became a media sensation throughout Indonesia. Hadi's conviction was swift and unanimous. The evidence was overwhelming, and his own detailed confessions left no room for doubt. The community struggled to reconcile their faith in traditional healing with the reality of his betrayal. Hadi Purwanto was executed by firing squad under the blazing tropical sun, the same sun that had witnessed his decade of deception and murder. His death brought closure to the families of his victims, but left lasting scars on a community whose trust in spiritual leaders had been forever shattered. If this story gave you chills, wait until you hear about the corrupt cop who used his badge to kill. From the steaming jungles of Indonesia, we now travel thousands of miles north to the frozen concrete cities of Eastern Europe. We leave behind the world of religious manipulation and ancient rituals, entering a realm where institutional corruption becomes the perfect cover for murder. In Indonesia, Hadi Purwanto exploited sacred traditions to mask his killing spree. But what happens when the person hunting killers becomes one himself? What occurs when the very system designed to protect society becomes a weapon in the hands of a predator? The cold streets of post-Soviet Eastern Europe hold the answer. Here, among the crumbling remnants of a failed political system, one man discovered that a police badge could be more powerful than any spiritual authority. While Hadi used faith as his weapon, our next killer wielded justice itself. Meet Leonid Kozlov, a decorated police investigator who spent his days solving murders and his nights committing them. For over 20 years, he used his intimate knowledge of criminal investigation to design the perfect crimes. The hunter had become the hunted's worst nightmare. In the grey wasteland of post-Soviet Eastern Europe, where political upheaval had left entire societies scrambling for stability, Leonid Kozlov found his calling among the ruins. Born in 1958 in a decaying industrial city, he witnessed firsthand how quickly order could collapse, and how desperately people craved someone to restore it. The police force of the early 1980s was a broken institution. Officers were underpaid, undertrained, and often corrupt. Yet within this dysfunction, Leonid discovered an opportunity. His sharp intellect and methodical approach to casework quickly set him apart from his colleagues. While other officers relied on intimidation and bribery, Leonid mastered the art of forensic investigation. His rise through the ranks was meteoric. By 25, he had solved more murder cases than officers with twice his experience. By 30, he was leading complex investigations that had baffled the department for years. His superiors praised his attention to detail and his ability to think like a criminal. They had no idea how accurate that assessment truly was. Leonid's first taste of corruption came through small violations of procedure. He would plant evidence to strengthen weak cases against suspects he knew were guilty. He justified these actions as serving justice when the system failed. But power, once tasted, demanded more. The transition from bending rules to breaking them happened gradually. Leonid began taking bribes to make evidence disappear in certain cases. He used his access to police databases to gather information for criminal associates. Each transgression made the next one easier to justify. By 1985, Leonid had crossed a line he could never return from. During a routine investigation, he murdered a witness who could have exposed his corruption. Standing over the body, he realized that his knowledge of criminal investigation made him virtually untouchable. He knew exactly how murders were solved because he was the one solving them. The perfect alibi. 400 words. Leonid's victim selection process demonstrated the cold calculation that made him so dangerous. He exclusively targeted marginalized women, prostitutes, drug addicts, homeless individuals, and undocumented immigrants. These were people society had already forgotten, whose disappearances would generate minimal investigation and even less public concern. His method for finding victims was chillingly systematic. During his official duties, Leonid would encounter these vulnerable women through arrests, witness interviews, or routine police interactions. He would note their personal details, living situations, and social connections. Women with no family, no permanent address, and no legitimate employment became entries in his private hunting journal. The psychological manipulation began during these official encounters. Leonid would present himself as their protector within a hostile system. He offered help with legal problems, promised to connect them with social services, or claimed he could provide protection from dangerous situations. These women, accustomed to police harassment and abuse, were grateful to find an officer who seemed to care about their welfare. Leonid chose his crime scenes with the expertise of a seasoned investigator. Railway yards and abandoned warehouses near train stations became his preferred locations. These areas offered multiple escape routes, minimal surveillance, and transient populations that made witness identification nearly impossible. The constant noise of train traffic masked any sounds from his victims. His forensic countermeasures were sophisticated and comprehensive. Leonid wore gloves and protective clothing that he disposed of immediately after each murder. He used cleaning chemicals to eliminate DNA evidence and deliberately contaminated crime scenes with materials from other locations. His knowledge of police procedure allowed him to mislead investigators by planting false clues that pointed toward different suspects. The timing of his murders was equally calculated. Leonid committed his crimes during periods when he was officially on duty, creating alibis through radio communications and patrol logs. He would respond to calls, file reports, and interact with colleagues shortly before and after each killing. This pattern made it appear impossible for him to be involved in the murders he was often assigned to investigate. Between 1985 and 2005, Leonid killed 17 women. His dual role as investigator and perpetrator gave him unprecedented control over the cases. He could manipulate evidence, misdirect resources, and ensure that investigations focused on suspects he knew were innocent. The frozen bureaucracy of the post-Soviet police system provided perfect cover for his crimes, as departments lacked the resources and coordination necessary to identify patterns across multiple cases. Leonid's downfall began at a memorial service for one of his victims, a young woman named Elena Volkov, who had been found murdered near the railway yards. The service was organized by a local charity that advocated for marginalized women, and Elena's aunt had traveled from a distant city to attend. During the ceremony, Elena's aunt approached several attendees, asking if anyone had seen her niece in the weeks before her death. When she described the police officer who had promised to help Elena with housing assistance, her description perfectly matched Leonid Kozlov. A social worker at the event recognized the name and realized that multiple women had mentioned the same helpful police investigator before their disappearances. Detective Maria Petrov, who had recently been assigned to review cold cases involving murdered women, began noticing disturbing patterns in the files. Crime scenes had been contaminated in remarkably similar ways. Evidence had been mishandled according to identical procedures. Most troubling, Leonid Kozlov's name appeared as the investigating officer in 12 of the 17 unsolved cases. Detective Petrov's psychological profile of the killer revealed someone with extensive knowledge of police procedure and forensic investigation. The perpetrator understood evidence collection, witness interviewing, and criminal psychology at a professional level. This insight, combined with the testimonies from the memorial service, focused suspicion directly on Leonid. The investigation had to be conducted in absolute secrecy. Detective Petrov worked with federal authorities to monitor Leonid's activities without alerting him to their suspicions. They discovered his private journal hidden in his apartment, containing detailed information about each victim and meticulous planning notes for future murders. When authorities searched the storage unit Leonid rented under a false name, they found clothing, jewelry, and personal items taken from his victims. DNA evidence on these trophies provided definitive proof of his crimes. The hunter who had evaded detection for 20 years was finally captured by the very investigative techniques he had mastered. Leonid Kozlov's arrest sent shockwaves through the Eastern European law enforcement community. The man who had been held up as an example of investigative excellence was revealed as one of the most prolific serial killers in the region's history. His colleagues struggled to reconcile the respected investigator they knew with the cold-blooded murderer he had become. During his interrogation, Leonid displayed the same methodical approach that had made him an effective investigator. He confessed to each murder in chronological order, providing detailed descriptions of his methods and motivations. His lack of remorse was as chilling as his crimes. He viewed his victims as necessary sacrifices to maintain his position within the corrupt system. The trial became a study in institutional failure. Leonid's defense argued that the system itself had created the monster, pointing to the corruption and dysfunction that had allowed him to operate undetected for decades. His conviction was unanimous, and he received 17 life sentences without possibility of parole. In prison, Leonid became a subject of fascination for criminal psychologists studying the intersection of law enforcement training and criminal behavior. His case is now taught in police academies as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked authority and institutional corruption. The comments are going crazy. Drop yours below and let us discuss. How do we protect ourselves from those meant to protect us? From the concrete streets and frozen alleyways of Eastern Europe, we now cross the Atlantic Ocean to the vast, untamed wilderness of the American frontier. We have journeyed from sacred rituals and corrupt badges to something far more primal, the ancient art of the hunt. Hadi Pawanto used religious faith as his cover. Leonid Kozlov wielded institutional authority as his shield. But our final killer chose a different path entirely. Warren Breckinridge turned the wilderness itself into his weapon. Where others hid behind civilization's structures, Warren embraced the raw brutality of nature. The endless forests, Isolated mountain ranges and desolate plains became his hunting ground. Here, among the wolves and bears, a predator far more dangerous than any wild animal stalked human prey. This is not just murder. This is survival of the fittest, taken to its most horrifying extreme. In these remote lands where cell phones have no signal and help is hundreds of miles away, Warren Breckinridge perfected the ultimate game. The hunt was about to begin. In the small Midwestern town of Coldridge, population 3,200, Warren Breckinridge appeared to be the most ordinary man you could imagine. His family bakery had served the community for 3 generations, filling Main Street with the warm aroma of fresh bread and sweet pastries every morning before dawn. Customers knew him as quiet, reliable, and always ready with a polite smile. But beneath this carefully constructed facade lived a man consumed by rage and humiliation. Warren's childhood had been a nightmare of psychological abuse orchestrated by his domineering father, who viewed his son's severe stutter as a personal embarrassment. Every mispronounced word earned Warren a beating. Every social interaction that went wrong resulted in hours of verbal torture about his inadequacies as a man. The stuttering made Warren a target for relentless bullying throughout school. Girls laughed at his attempts to speak to them. Boys excluded him from every social group. By graduation, Warren had developed a seething hatred for anyone who possessed the confidence and social grace he lacked. Women, in particular, became the focus of his resentment. They represented everything he could never have, and everything that had been denied to him. Warren inherited the bakery at 28 when his father died of a heart attack. The business provided perfect cover for his growing antisocial tendencies. He worked alone, rarely interacted with customers beyond taking their orders, and maintained his reputation as a harmless introvert. But Warren was far from harmless. His transformation began when he discovered hunting. In the wilderness, his stutter disappeared. Among the trees and mountains, he found a world where physical prowess mattered more than social skills. Warren became an expert marksman, an accomplished tracker, and a master of survival techniques. Most importantly, he learned that he enjoyed the kill. The power over life and death filled a void that nothing else could satisfy. Warren's evolution from animal hunter to human predator happened gradually over 5 years. His isolated location outside Coldridge provided access to millions of acres of national forest and wilderness areas. His grandfather's vintage Cessna aircraft, which Warren had learned to pilot in his 20s, became the perfect tool for transporting victims to remote locations where no one would ever find them. The victim selection process revealed Warren's methodical intelligence. He targeted women who were isolated, vulnerable, and unlikely to be immediately missed. Runaway teenagers sleeping rough in bus stations became his preferred prey. These girls had often fled abusive homes and possessed little trust in authority figures. They were desperate for food, shelter, and any offer of legitimate work. Warren's approach was patient and calculating. He would spend weeks observing potential victims, learning their routines, and assessing their vulnerability. When he identified a suitable target, he would offer employment at his bakery, room, board, and steady wages in exchange for helping with the early morning baking schedule. To desperate young women living on the streets, this opportunity seemed like salvation. The transportation phase of his operation was where Warren's true nature emerged. He would fly his victims to a remote airstrip he had constructed on private land deep in the mountains. The flight itself served as psychological preparation. Isolated at 10,000 feet with no possibility of escape, his victims began to understand that their situation had changed dramatically. Upon landing, Warren would release his victims into the wilderness with basic survival supplies and a 12-hour head start. He explained the rules of his twisted game with chilling calmness. They could run, hide, or try to find civilization, but he would be hunting them. If they survived 72 hours, he promised to fly them to safety. Of course, Warren had no intention of letting anyone survive. His hunting methodology combined military tactics with psychological warfare. Warren used night vision equipment, motion sensors, and tracking devices to monitor his victims' movements. He would periodically appear near their hiding spots, allowing them to see him before melting back into the forest. This psychological pressure ensured his victims remained terrified and exhausted, making mistakes that would lead to their capture. The kills themselves were swift and efficient. Warren preferred using a crossbow for its silence and the skill required for accurate shots. He viewed each successful hunt as validation of his superiority over those who had tormented him throughout his life. The wilderness had become his kingdom, and he was its ultimate predator. Warren's decade-long killing spree ended because of one remarkable woman, 22-year-old Rebecca Chen, a former college athlete who had been living on the streets for 6 months after aging out of the foster care system. When Warren approached her at a bus station in Denver, offering work at his bakery, Rebecca's survival instincts told her something was wrong, but hunger and desperation overcame her caution. During the flight to his remote airstrip, Rebecca noticed details that others had missed. She memorized landmarks, compass headings, and the aircraft's registration numbers. When Warren released her into the wilderness, she immediately began implementing survival strategies learned during wilderness camping trips with her high school track team. Instead of running blindly through the forest, Rebecca moved with purpose and intelligence. She used streams to mask her scent, created false trails to confuse her pursuer, and constructed hidden shelters in areas that provided multiple escape routes. Most crucially, she resisted the panic that had doomed Warren's previous victims. On the second night, Rebecca managed to steal some of Warren's equipment, including a GPS device and emergency radio. She discovered that she was over 200 miles from the nearest town, but the GPS revealed the location of Warren's airstrip. Rather than trying to reach civilization on foot, Rebecca made the brilliant decision to return to the plane. Her testimony to investigators was precise and devastating. She provided exact coordinates, detailed descriptions of Warren's methods, and crucial evidence about his psychological state during the hunt. Her account led authorities directly to Warren's mountain compound, where they discovered a horrifying collection of trophies taken from his victims. The search of Warren's property revealed jewelry, clothing, and personal items from dozens of women spanning 15 years. Hidden in an underground bunker near his airstrip, investigators found detailed journals documenting each hunt, complete with photographs and methodical notes about his victims' final moments. Warren Breckenridge's arrest shattered the quiet community of Coldridge. Neighbors who had bought bread from him for years struggled to comprehend that their mild-mannered baker was responsible for dozens of murders. The FBI investigation revealed that Warren had been operating undetected since 2008, using his bakery as both cover and hunting ground. During his trial, Warren showed no remorse for his actions. He described each hunt with clinical detachment, referring to his victims as challenges to be overcome rather than human beings with lives and dreams. His defense team attempted to argue that childhood trauma had created his psychological disorders, but the jury was unmoved by these explanations. The evidence against Warren was overwhelming. Rebecca Chen's testimony, combined with the physical evidence found at his compound, left no doubt about his guilt. He was convicted on 37 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. Warren Breckenridge was executed by lethal injection on a cold Tuesday morning in February, exactly 5 years after his arrest. His final words were an apology to his victims' families, the first and only expression of remorse he ever offered. The bakery was demolished, and the site remains empty to this day. 3 killers, 3 continents, 3 completely different methods. Yet Hadi Purwanto, Leonid Kozlov, and Warren Breckenridge shared disturbing similarities that reveal how predators operate in our world. Each man exploited society's most fundamental structures of trust. Hadi perverted religious faith, turning sacred healing into murder. Leonid corrupted law enforcement, using his badge as a license to kill. Warren weaponized hospitality, transforming offers of employment into death sentences. They understood that people are most vulnerable when seeking help, hope, or healing. All 3 targeted society's forgotten members: women without strong social connections, individuals struggling with poverty or addiction, and people who existed on the margins where their disappearances would generate minimal investigation. These predators recognized that marginalized victims receive less attention from both law enforcement and media. Most chilling was their patience. None of these killers acted impulsively. They spent years building reputations, establishing trust, and perfecting their methods. Hadi cultivated his spiritual authority for a decade. Leonid rose through police ranks over 20 years. Warren operated his bakery for 15 years before beginning his hunting spree. Their success came from playing the long game while society remained oblivious to their true nature. Recognition of warning signs can save lives. Trust your instincts when someone seems too helpful, too interested in your personal situation, or too eager to isolate you from friends and family. Predators often test boundaries with small requests before escalating to dangerous demands. Community vigilance remains our strongest defense. When someone disappears, do not accept simple explanations without verification. Demand thorough investigations. Share information with others who might recognize patterns that individual cases cannot reveal. The memorial service attendee who recognized Leonid's description literally saved future victims by speaking up. Never underestimate the power of your gut feelings. Rebecca Chen survived Warren's hunt, partly because she noticed details that felt wrong during their initial meeting. Her instincts told her to memorize information that later proved crucial to his capture. Most importantly, support systems for vulnerable populations must be strengthened. Marginalized individuals become targets precisely because they lack protection. Communities that care for their most vulnerable members make it harder for predators to operate undetected. Every person deserves safety, regardless of their social status or circumstances. These three monsters remind us that evil rarely announces itself with dramatic flourishes. It comes disguised as healing, protection, and opportunity. It wears familiar faces and exploits our deepest needs for connection and safety. We bear collective responsibility for protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Every ignored disappearance, every dismissed concern, every marginalized individual creates space for predators to thrive. But knowledge brings power. Awareness creates vigilance. Understanding these patterns helps us recognize threats before they claim more victims. Subscribe for more untold true crime stories that expose the hidden predators among us. Comment below with your thoughts on these cases. Your insights might help others recognize similar warning signs. Share this video if it opened your eyes to dangers hiding in plain sight.